Ever feel like you're kind of stuck? Like spinning your wheels but going nowhere? You're putting in the work but just not seeing the results you want.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
It can be super frustrating, right?
Eh.
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive into a book that might have some answers. You're looking for Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yeah. Atomic Habits? That's a good one.
Have you read it?
Oh, yeah. Cover to cover. I actually recommend it to a lot of my clients.
Nice. So if you're finding this kind of deep dive helpful, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Now, Atomic Habits has become incredibly popular. I mean, it's a New York Times bestseller and boasts an impressive 4.8-star rating on Amazon with over 100,000 reviews. People are clearly resonating with its message.
Absolutely. It's a really practical guide to understanding and changing your habits.
So let's get into it. What's the core idea behind Atomic Habits?
Well, the idea is that small changes, tiny adjustments you make consistently over time, they can have a huge impact.
Small changes, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, think of it like this. Imagine an airplane taking off from New York, headed for Los Angeles. Now, if the pilot adjusts the course by just 3 degrees...
3 degrees, that's barely noticeable, right?
Exactly. It's a tiny shift, but guess what? They'll end up in Tijuana, Mexico instead of LA.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference for such a small adjustment.
Right. And it's the same with our habits. Those small tweaks, you barely even notice them at first, but over time, they can completely change your trajectory.
So no need for those, like, dramatic overnight transformation.
Woke. It's not about those big, flashy changes. It's about those steady, consistent efforts day after day.
I like that, steady and consistent.
James Clear argues that real lasting change doesn't come from some massive upheaval. It comes from the accumulation of these tiny improvements. He calls it the 1% rule.
The 1% rule, what's that?
It's the idea that if you can just get 1% better each day, that leads to exponential growth over time.
1% a day, that
Yeah.
doesn't sound like much.
It doesn't, but think about this. If you improve by just 1% every single day for a year, you'll be almost 38 times better by the end of the year.
38 times better. Okay, now that's impressive.
It is. And on the flip side, if you get 1% worse each day, you'll end up close to zero.
So it works both ways, huh?
It does. That's the power of compounding. Small changes, they add up to huge results over time, whether those changes are positive or negative.
Wow, that's a powerful concept.
Yeah.
So how do we harness this power of compounding for ourselves?
That's where systems come in. Clear has this great line. He says, forget about goals, focus on systems instead.
Forget about goals. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but it's a really powerful shift in thinking.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Explain this whole goals versus systems thing. What's the distinction?
Well, think about it. You have successful people and unsuccessful people, right? And they often have very similar goals.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not the goals themselves that determine success. Achieving a goal, that's just a fleeting moment in time.
Okay, so you reach your goal, then what?
Yeah, once you hit that target, the motivation can fade. You might slip back into old patterns.
I see what you mean. So goals are about the destination, but systems are more about the journey.
Exactly. Systems are the processes that drive that consistent action, regardless of whether you've reached a specific goal or not. It's about showing up every day and focusing on continuous improvement.
Okay, so it's about building those sustainable habits rather than chasing some fleeting accomplishment.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, to understand how to build these effective systems, let's delve into the 3 layers of behavior change: outcomes, processes, and identity. What are those all about?
Okay, so outcomes, those are the results you want, right? Processes are the actions you take to get there. And then identity, that's all about your beliefs about yourself, your self-image.
Okay, so most of us, when we think about changing something, we start with the outcomes, right? I want to lose weight, or I want to write a book.
Yeah, that's natural. But Clear argues that the most effective way to change is to actually focus on the person you want to become, on shifting your identity.
So instead of, I want to learn to play the guitar, I should be saying, I am a musician.
Exactly. Or instead of saying, I want to run a marathon, you start saying, I am a runner.
Interesting. So it's about embodying the identity that aligns with your desired habits.
It is. It's about changing how you see yourself so those actions just feel natural, like they're an extension of who you already are.
That's pretty powerful.
And it makes it so much easier to stick to those habits in the long run.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together: atomic habits, systems over goals, and this identity-based change. But how do we actually make these habits stick? How do we rewire our brains to make those desired actions automatic?
Well, that's where the science of habit formation comes in. Clear breaks down the mechanics of how habits actually form with what he calls the habit loop. It's a four-step process: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Okay, let's break that down. What's a cue in this context?
A cue is basically anything that triggers your brain to initiate a behavior. It could be a specific time of day, a location, an emotional state, even a preceding action.
So, like, uh, what would be an example?
Well, let's say checking your phone. The cue might be feeling bored or seeing your phone light up with a notification.
Okay, so the cue sets the habit in motion. Then what about the craving?
The craving is that motivational force behind the habit. It's the desire to change your internal state. So in that phone example, the craving might be to relieve that boredom or satisfy your curiosity about who messaged you.
So the cue triggers a craving, and then what's the response?
The response is the actual habit that you perform, the action you take. So in our phone example, the response would be picking up your phone and checking that notification or scrolling through social media.
Okay, and lastly, what's the reward? I'm guessing that's the satisfying part that makes you want to repeat the habit, right?
You got it. The reward is that positive reinforcement. It strengthens that habit loop. It could be a feeling of pleasure, a sense of accomplishment, relief from boredom or anxiety. Whatever it is, it makes you feel good.
So in the phone example, the reward might be the entertainment you get from social media or the satisfaction of knowing who texted you. Okay, so the reward basically reinforces the connection between the cue and the response, making it more likely we'll repeat that habit in the future.
Yes, and the more you repeat that cycle, the stronger the habit becomes. It becomes almost automatic, like a well-worn path in your brain.
It's like training your brain to do it without even thinking about it.
Exactly. And to actually change our habits, Clear proposes 4 laws, 4 powerful levers we can use to make good habits easier to adopt and bad habits easier to break.
4 laws, huh?
Ooh,
Okay, I'm ready to hear about these. Let's start with the first one. How do we make those good habits obvious and bad habits invisible?
it all starts with awareness. It's called make it obvious. We got to shine a light on our current habits, the good ones and the bad ones, just to get a better understanding of what we're doing automatically.
So it's kind of like taking inventory of our daily actions.
Yeah, exactly. Clear suggests starting with what he calls a habit scorecard.
Habit scorecard, huh? What's that?
It's basically just a list of everything you do in a day, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep.
So you're writing down every little thing. Sounds like a lot of work.
It can be, but it's worth it. It's not about judgment, it's about observation. You're just noticing those patterns that shape your day.
Okay, so it's about bringing those unconscious actions to light.
Yeah.
Seeing the habits we might not even realize are driving our behavior.
Exactly. Once you have that awareness, you can start to pick out the habits that are serving you well and the ones that might be holding you back. And then when you're ready to actually change a habit, Clear says you got to be specific.
Specific.
Yeah, vague intentions like, I want to eat healthier, they're just not that effective.
So instead of eat healthier, it's more like, I'm going to swap my afternoon bag of chips for a piece of fruit 3 times a week.
Exactly. Be precise. Take the guesswork out of it. Make it clear and actionable. He even suggests using this formula. I will behavior at time and location.
Okay, I like that. So I could say, I will eat a piece of fruit at 3 p.m. at my desk.
Perfect. No more ambiguity. You've got a clear plan.
Right. It's like a recipe for habit change.
Now, another powerful technique for making those good habits obvious is something called habit stacking.
Habit stacking. What's that all about?
It's basically linking a new habit to an existing one. It's super simple. The formula is, after current habit, I will new habit.
Oh, so you're piggybacking off something you already do automatically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're using that existing habit as a trigger for the new one.
I like that. Makes it seem less daunting.
Right. So you could say, after I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 5 minutes.
Oh, that's a good one. I think I could actually do that.
And choosing the right sugar is key. It's got to be something reliable, something you do every single day without fail.
Yeah, like brushing my teeth or having my morning coffee.
Exactly. Now, another important piece of the puzzle is the environment.
The environment. You mean like where I am physically?
Yeah, Clear believes that designing your surroundings to support your desired habits can make a huge difference.
You know, I've always struggled with willpower. Maybe that's why so many of my New Year's resolutions fizzle out by February. This idea of actually shaping my environment to make things easier really appeals to me.
It's a game changer. We're just way more likely to give in to temptation if it's right there in front of us.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely attest to that.
Right. Think about it. If you're trying to eat healthier, having a bowl of fresh fruit on the counter makes that healthy choice so much more obvious and appealing.
Whereas if I've got a pantry full of chips and cookies,
Yeah.
well, my willpower tends to go out the window.
Exactly. So it's about minimizing those temptations,
Mhm.
making those desired actions as convenient as possible. Clear calls this priming the environment.
Priming the environment. I like that. It's like setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. If you want to read more, keep a book on your bedside table instead of your phone.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Yeah.
Exactly. The more visible and accessible you make those cues for good habits, the more likely you are to actually follow through. And on the flip side, make those bad habits invisible.
So if I'm trying to cut back on social media, I should log out of my accounts or even delete the apps.
That's the idea. It's
Yeah,
like putting those temptations on a timeout.
I can get behind that. This is
Mhm.
making so much sense. Now, this idea of context influencing our behavior leads to another fascinating concept that Clear talks about, called context is the cue.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. What he's saying is that our relationship with the objects in our environment actually shapes our actions.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example?
Think about a desk. For one person, it might be this clean, clutter-free zone dedicated to focus and productivity. But for someone else, it might be a chaotic jumble of papers and coffee cups and
The
distractions.
same desk, different habits.
Yeah.
I could definitely relate to that.
Right. So what Clear suggests is creating separate zones for different activities.
Separate zones.
Yeah, he uses this phrase, one space, one use. So your bedroom is for sleeping, your desk is for working, your kitchen table is for eating, and so on.
So by keeping those activities separate, we avoid those conflicting cues.
Exactly. No more working from the couch surrounded by snacks and the TV remote.
That's a great idea. My apartment is about to get a serious makeover.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about making those good habits obvious,
Mm-hmm.
but how do we make them attractive? You know, some habits just don't seem very appealing no matter how hard I try.
That's where the second law comes in. Make it attractive. We gotta tap into the power of dopamine.
Dopamine. Isn't that the pleasure chemical?
It is. It's that feel-good neurochemical that drives our motivation and our reward systems.
See, we're talking about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
Exactly. And here's the key. Dopamine is released not only when we experience pleasure, but also when we anticipate it.
Oh, so it's about building that anticipation, that excitement for the reward.
Right. One way to do this is with something called temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling. Sounds intriguing. What is that?
It's basically pairing something you need to do with something you want to do.
Oh, you know what? I actually do that already. I only allow myself to watch my favorite TV show while I'm on the treadmill. It makes exercising so much more bearable.
Perfect example. You're using the allure of something pleasurable to motivate yourself to do something you might not find as enjoyable on its own.
Yeah, it totally works.
There's actually a psychological principle behind this called Premack's principle. More probable behaviors reinforce less probable behaviors.
So I'm basically hacking my brain's reward system.
You got it. Now, another way to make habits more attractive is through social influence.
Social influence, so like peer pressure.
Kinda, but in this case, it's peer pressure for good. We're way more likely to adopt habits that are the norm in the groups we belong to.
So it's like if all my friends are into fitness, I'm more likely to get on board too.
Exactly. So surround yourself with people who support those desired habits. Join a running club, a book club, or a group of friends who are all committed to healthy living.
Makes those habits feel more appealing and attainable when you've got a supportive community cheering you on. Now, some habits like exercising or eating healthy, they just don't feel naturally appealing, no matter how hard I try to reframe them. Any advice for those tougher cases?
Yeah, those can be tricky. That's where this idea of reprogramming your brain comes in. It's about shifting your perspective to actually find pleasure in those activities that might initially seem challenging.
Okay, I'm listening. How do I reprogram my brain to actually enjoy going to the gym?
Well, instead of focusing on the exertion, the sweat, all that stuff, shift your attention to the feeling of accomplishment you'll have afterward, the long-term health benefits you're gaining.
Okay, so it's about focusing on the positive aspects, the rewards, rather than the immediate discomfort.
Exactly. It's about reframing those negative associations, finding ways to connect those habits to positive experiences. It might sound simple, but it can make a huge difference.
Okay, I like that. So we've made a habit obvious and attractive. How do we make sure it actually sticks?
This is where the third law comes in, make it easy. It's all about understanding human nature. We're wired to take the path of least resistance. You know, we gravitate toward those actions that require the least amount of effort.
Oh, I am definitely guilty of that. My couch always seems way more appealing than the gym.
Exactly. And that's why Clear emphasizes the importance of reducing friction when it comes to building good habits. We got to make those desired actions as easy and convenient as possible.
So, like, if I want to make exercising a regular habit, I shouldn't keep my workout clothes buried in the back of my closet.
Exactly. Keep them front and center. Maybe even laid out the night before. So there's one less obstacle in the morning.
It's all about removing those little stumbling blocks, those points of friction that can so easily derail our best intentions.
Right. And this ties back into that idea of priming the environment we talked about earlier. It's all about setting yourself up for success.
Right, making it easy to do the right thing. Now, there's another helpful technique Clear talks about called the 2-minute rule. It's supposed to be a great way to overcome procrastination and get started on a new habit, especially if it feels overwhelming.
It is. The idea is to start with a simplified version of the habit, something that takes no more than 2 minutes to complete.
Okay, so give me an example. How would I use the 2-minute rule if my goal was to run a marathon?
Well, the 2-minute version of that might just be putting on your running shoes and walking around the block. Or if you want to write a book, the 2-minute version could be just opening your laptop and writing a single sentence.
It's like that saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We're just breaking it down into those bite-sized, manageable actions.
Exactly. It's about taking that initial step no matter how small. And often, once you've overcome that inertia, you're more likely to keep going.
It's like tricking your brain into getting started.
Exactly. Now, what about those bad habits? Is there a 2-minute rule for making those unwanted behaviors more difficult?
Good question. I'd love to find a way to make those bad habits just disappear.
Well, it's less about a 2-minute rule and more about increasing friction. You want to make those bad habits as inconvenient as possible. So if you're trying to cut down on social media log out of all your accounts, or even delete the apps, put your phone in another room while you're working, or use website blockers to prevent distractions.
So it's kind of the opposite of what we do for good habits. Instead of priming the environment for success, we're making those bad habits harder to access.
Exactly. You're putting obstacles in your path, making those undesirable behaviors less appealing, less convenient.
Like putting those tempting treats on the highest shelf in the pantry.
Exactly. Now, the fourth and final law is all about reinforcement. It's called make it satisfying. This is where the reward comes in.
Okay. We all like to be rewarded, right? It feels good to know we're on the right track.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So to really make a habit stick, we've got to make it rewarding. Clear says that what is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided.
But that's the thing with good habits, like eating healthy or exercising. The rewards, they tend to be delayed.
That's a great point. Clear calls this the mismatch between immediate and delayed returns. You know those bad habits like eating junk food or scrolling through social media, they give you that instant hit of dopamine. But those long-term consequences, they might not be so present.
Yeah, the immediate gratification versus the long-term pain.
Exactly. With good habits, though, they might require more effort up front, but the rewards come later.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we make those good habits feel more rewarding in the moment? Especially when those unhealthy temptations are staring us in the face.
One effective strategy is to use visual measures of progress, like a habit tracker.
Oh, I love habit trackers. There's something so satisfying about checking those boxes off and seeing your progress laid out visually.
It is. It's a simple but powerful way to create that sense of momentum, to reinforce those positive behaviors.
Yeah, it's like giving yourself a gold star for every successful day.
Exactly. Now, another thing that trips people up is staying motivated when those inevitable slip-ups happen. You know, we're not perfect. We all stumble from time to time.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely had my fair share of slip-ups.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get discouraged and just give up.
Clear really emphasizes the importance of self-compassion here. It's not about being perfect. It's about progress. Those setbacks are going to happen. We're human. But it's about learning from those slip-ups and moving forward without beating yourself up.
So it's like giving yourself permission to be imperfect.
Exactly. View those slip-ups as learning opportunities. Ask yourself, okay, what triggered this behavior? What could I do differently next time? How can I adjust my environment to make it easier to stay on track?
I like that. Instead of dwelling on the mistake, we're using it as a stepping stone to do better next time.
Right. And Clear offers this great strategy for recovering quickly from those slip-ups. He calls it the never miss twice rule. So if you miss a workout, don't let it turn into a whole week of missed workouts. Get back on schedule as soon as possible.
Don't let one slip-up turn into a landslide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is all starting to make so much sense. It's about those small, incremental adjustments that ultimately lead to lasting change.
And being kind to ourselves along the way.
Absolutely. So to wrap up our deep dive into atomic habits, let's leave our listeners with a powerful message. What's the one key takeaway you want them to remember?
If there's one thing I want our listeners to take away from this conversation, it's that small changes done consistently over time can lead to extraordinary results.
Well said. Don't underestimate the power of those atomic habits.
Absolutely. It's about taking control of our habits and shaping our destinies one small step at a time. And if our listeners are looking for more in-depth information and practical strategies, I highly recommend checking out Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a game changer.
It is. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the deep dive for more insightful explorations of fascinating topics.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning.